This is an Empty Closet Radio podcast. Get more at facebook.com/emptyclosetradio.
So camp.
Stop laughing at me. It's not even funny.
Yes, it is.
Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sam.
And this is The Empty Closet.
The show for everyone, whether you're in the closet
Or out and proud.
or somewhere in between.
101.9 Coast FM. You're in The Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam, and today we are stepping back in time to have a quick glance at some of our not-so-recent history that may be of interest to the gays.
Not just the gays, anybody listening. Basically, I started sending Andrew a bunch of articles throughout the week, and that led to this episode. Now, if you do want to catch up on any past episodes that are perhaps a little more modern, then you can look for us on your favourite podcasting app. Just search for Empty Closet Radio, hit the subscribe button, or you can follow us on social media. We're on the Big Blue Book of Faces, Empty Closet Radio, hit the like button, or the blue Tweety bird at emptycloset_AU, all lowercase.
You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in The Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
I can swear, I can joke. I see what's on my mind. If I drink, if I smoke, I keep up with the guys.
Empty Closet Radio. Listen to us using your TuneIn radio app on your smartphone. Very smart. .9 Coast FM. You're in The Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. Now, Sam, we're talking about history today, and we do have a lot to thank the Greeks for. I found some history about red lipstick, Greek invention, also the laws that go along with it, olive oil and bread being used. Perhaps not as bread, as a food, were your contributions. So we have a lot to thank the ancient Greeks for, right?
There's also a bunch of science and philosophy and maths and art and all that kind of stuff, but we're not getting into that today because it's a bit too heavy for us.
It's too heavy, and, you can go to real school for that.
No, I just don't think we could do it justice in this 5-minute slot in the show.
No, we'd need an expert. But luckily enough, we do have experts on hand about these other things.
Andrew is an expert on the modern-day equivalent to the secondary use of olive oil by the Greeks. Do you want to explain to the listeners what that is, Andrew?
So not an expert, Sam. So what Sam's talking about is, apparently, olive oil was used as lubricant during sex. Is that right?
So for some reference here, the way that we and we've talked about this in the past on past episodes, the way that we view modern sexuality is very, very different to how many societies viewed sexuality before. As an example, ancient Greeks, you weren't homosexual for having sex with men. It wasn't just your preference. The issue was whether you were the giver or the receiver, because sex was kind of about dominance. But having said that, if you were a young man, being the lover of an older, powerful man gave you power, and men generally preferred the company of other men because women were stinky poopy heads, basically. But as Andrew is possibly aware, maybe, when you haven't got a lot of moisture going on in that back passage, it's a little bit hard, pun intended, to really get some action going, and you can do yourself damage. Now, modern synthetic lubricants are amazing things, but they didn't have that in ancient Greece. Part of the reason that olive oil was so popular is because olive oil was used as lube for men having sex with men. Or, more correctly, people with penises having sex with other people with penises.
And it probably should be noted that the reason why olive oil is not such a great idea these days is because it doesn't really play very nice with condoms.
No, don't use oil with condoms. For the love of God.
But they also had some other, cool inventions, for example, when the men were not sleeping with other men, there, of course, was prostitution, one of the oldest professions in the world, so I'm told. But in ancient Greece, they passed this law about, if you were a working girl, you had to wear bright red lipstick, and it's not like lipstick that we think of, nicely purified, basically paint that you, put on yourself. This lipstick was like made from all kinds of gross stuff that you probably shouldn't be putting near any of your orifices. And they passed this law that, you know, if you were soliciting, if you were working, then you had to have bright red lipstick so that the people in the town could identify who you were and so that the men wouldn't approach the wrong people.
There's something to be said for that in a way, because it's like having a sign out the front, you know, rather than men walking up to every random that they like on the street and going, let's go, which is quite horrifying. They'd actually know who's available, for service, for lack of a better word. Now, but if there were young men working, would they wear lipstick?
Well, I don't think that was the go, actually. I think when we were talking earlier about how young men would often have like an older lover, what I have found out that apparently this is why, so everybody would kind of, like all the guys would go to the gym and like work out, like lift heavy things and put them back down again. And this is the spot where men would meet the other men that they might potentially have sex with. So I don't think they had to wear lipstick, because I don't think they were getting paid in anything except for, you know, if they were sleeping with someone powerful, then they got power.
So it was a less direct transaction, basically.
Which is very odd, because between men it's usually very direct.
Oh dear. And the other thing, before we run out of time in this segment, is now they're not baguettes, because that is the wrong language, but a baguette style of bread would be overbaked so that it was quite hard and would be sold as a pleasure tool. And that's not sold to women. Like, that's sold to people with penises. So bread dildos were also a thing in ancient Greece. Andrew is kind of sniggering quietly. It's great.
Ancient Greece. It sounds lovely, except for I imagine all the death and destruction that went along with this, because we're going to talk about, in the next little bit, we're going to talk about the history of condoms as well, and we're going to realise why they're such a good idea. You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
Empty Closet Radio. Like us on Facebook.
One 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam, and today we are talking about ancient history. Literally ancient history. One of the things that have been around for a lot longer than I actually thought is condoms. They've been around for heaps of years.
Almost literally aeons. Not quite. But condoms, since people associated sex with babies, people have been trying to figure out a way to have sex without babies. Like, population control is a thing.
But also, I think it's important to note, thanks to this new study that's come out from the Beijing Friendship Hospital in China, they actually say that condoms can boost your vaginal health and prevent minor infections from occurring. I can't believe this is new research.
I'm still trying to work out what they're meaning by boost health, if aside from prevent infection.
Yeah, I think it should be the other way around. I think it should be prevent infections, thus better health. And maybe not just for your vagina, maybe for like, you know, whatever orifice. I
do think that they may be talking about micro tears and other things that we don't really have time to get into the technicalities of today. But condoms were not nearly so scientific, 1,000 years ago. 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Longer.
Well, Sam, you know that the very first documented evidence of condoms is, of course, it's in art. Like everything. So it's actually like caveman art that was found in France. So apparently there's like a painting on the wall that actual scientists, you know what they're talking about, they reckon that these paintings represent condoms.
Or someone wearing a condom. Now, they dated around 11,000 BC, so that's 13,000 years ago, for those of you counting at home. That is a long time ago. Now, there is an argument from some historians rather than archaeologists that condoms made of cloth were used in ancient Egypt, which sounds horribly ineffective, but we do know that ancient Egyptians dabbled in different forms of birth control. But the thing that seemed quite exciting in ancient Egypt is that they were using condoms to prevent disease. So they weren't just using it as a method to not have babies, they were using it as a method to prevent the spread of STIs.
I wonder what kind of fabric it was. It must have been like very fine fabric. Otherwise, it'd be very uncomfortable.
I have a feeling it would be uncomfortable no matter what fabric it was. That just does not sound really very nice.
So that dates back to like 1000 BC. So that's like 3,000 years ago. Oh, Sam's counting for me.
1,000 years ago, says Andrew.
In the scheme of things, is there much difference between 1,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago? For me,
Yes.
okay. Then the next evidence that we have of condoms is from 1400 AD, so 1400 years after the whole Jesus thing. They were called, but wait, these are my favorite, Sam, right? So, glans condoms, they only covered the very head part of the penis, and they were used in China and Japan. In China, they were made from lamb intestines or like silk that had been like oiled, or like some paper. In Japan, they used tortoise shell or animal horn. I'm fairly sure that all of those options would be like incredibly uncomfortable, but I think that China was on the right track by using like the lamb intestines and the oiled paper. That would be better.
Well, once you moved away from linen, animal intestines were for many years the most common condom, but they were reused. They were rinsed out. It's a terrible idea. Don't reuse condoms. If you're listening and you think that's a great idea to save money, don't do it. Please don't do it.
Well, so now you're talking about like linen, right? So in the 1500s, there was an Italian dude who he was like, syphilis is killing us all, which is true. There was a lot of syphilis that was killing lots of people. And so he recommended using a linen sheath that was soaked in some chemicals. God knows what they were. Chemicals, and then dried, and it would help prevent acquiring the disease. But my favorite thing about this Italian doctor is that he then did an experiment, and he made heaps of them and gave them to 1,100 participants and encouraged them to go forth and use them. And then he monitored to see which ones got infected with syphilis. So I don't know how well the trial worked.
Well, according to his research, none of them got infected with syphilis. So, I mean, maybe he fabricates his data. Who knows? But at least there's a scientific method, big followed. So, that's quite exciting.
That is true. And then condoms take an interesting turn in the 1600s, but we're going to come back to that right after this.
I feel you closer, I feel you near. The days grow longer, there is magic in the air, I see you move.
Empty Closet Radio, because no one else wants to be stuck in the closet. Go on.
101.9 Coast FM, you're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam, and we are talking history today, starting with something that is very important, Sam, and that is the history of condoms. Possibly the most important contraception that we've ever invented, let's be honest.
There's arguments to be made for that, but let's not get into that.
Sam's like, I'm not going to rage today, Andrew. Not going to rage. So we're up to the 1600s. 1605, the Catholic Church said condoms are immoral. They're not a good idea. It's kind of interesting, that argument could be still going today.
That's like if anybody listens to the Monty Python song, every sperm is sacred. It's still going.
Well, yeah, it's still going. And the reason why they felt that it was kind of important to have this around the 1600s is because this is the first time that condoms that were made from animal intestines, which are probably one of the better steps forward in the technology, were made available to the public. But they were super expensive, so people did wash them and reuse them, and that was probably not the best and brightest idea, let's be honest.
I do like that around this time is when the word condom was first used, except originally it was condoms, that were being blamed for the drop in the English birth rate by the English Birth Rate Commission.
Yeah, because suddenly people had control over whether they got pregnant or not. Like, that's crazy talk.
Incredible. Who wants control over their own life?
And then it wasn't until the 1700s. So this is like 100 years after condoms have been like pretty much widely available to people, even though they were, rewashing them and using them a bit dodgy. And condoms were being sold in places like pubs or in the marketplace or whatever. And doctors started saying, maybe these condoms are encouraging us to have unsafe sex with different partners. And their first objection to it was actually on moral grounds. So these people were doctors, but they had no evidence. They were just saying it's immoral to do this, because they thought that it was encouraging people to sleep around.
And look, there's something to be said for that argument, because when you feel safer doing an activity, you're more likely to do it. But I think that they're probably delusional if they think that people weren't sleeping around before condoms.
Yeah, a little bit delusional. It wasn't until 1839 that Goodyear created a rubber condom.
So if you ever look at the tyres on a car and it says if you only need them once a year, it's a good year, you can apply that to condoms as well.
I don't think that they really advertised them, though, really. It was around this time, like the late 1800s, that people started using the name rubber instead of saying condom. So that term has stuck around for a long time, even though a lot of condoms are not actually made from rubber anymore. In 1912, a German guy, he invented a way to manufacture condoms that included being able to give them like a texture. So it means that suddenly you could have like ribbed condoms or, ones with all kinds of fancy textures. And that was only around the 1912. So they haven't even been around that long, but they were super popular and remain really popular today. Now, in some countries, condoms were not the well-accepted thing that they are today. In some countries, condoms were actually more like, they were like contraband. So like in Ireland, they made it illegal to advertise condoms, much in the same way that it's illegal for cigarette companies to advertise in Australia. And so that was like an indicator that, people were getting a bit nervous about this new technology that allowed us to have more sexual freedom. Fortunately, 100 years later, they decided that was a bad idea and people can start advertising them again. No more restrictions. Everyone was using them.
So, no balloons, no party. Possibly the best slogan about condoms ever.
That came... Well... I have never actually...
Don't be silly, cover your willy.
Oh goodness. These sayings, they all come from like the 1950s, 1960s. And it says that now they've got some actual proper data about how many people are using condoms. So 42% of Americans start relying on condoms for birth control and STI prevention. So you can really see that they're like super popular. There were, of course, some other choice mottos, advertising slogans used by all the companies, including one by Durex in 1957. When they invented the first condom that had lubrication.
Do you want to guess what the phrase was?
I totally don't want to guess what the phrase was.
The way it's written in front of me is it was a wet, hot American summer. Glorious.
I bet that was a super successful advertising campaign for them.
Now, just a point before we finish. I don't know the date that these were invented, but if you are the owner of a vagina and not a penis, and you want to be able to use barrier methods and not rely on your partner who may have a penis, aside from dental dams, which are flat plastic or flat latex or whatever, you can now get... They call them female condoms. I call them vaginal condoms, which apparently feel better if you are having penis in vagina sex, because they don't decrease sensation, but they do take a bit of a trick to practice. So if those are available for you out there, if you want to use them, or you can just go for the penile sheath. You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
Empty Closet Radio, facebook.com/Empty Closet Radio.
Just one last time.
101.9 Coast FM, you're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam, and on today's show, we're talking all about ancient history, literally ancient. We just ran through a bit of history about condoms, which I find really fascinating. I didn't know that we had such technical advances so recently, but it kind of makes sense, I guess. But when we were talking about condoms, inevitably the church comes to mind, and what was around before condoms, when there still was the church, was fine art. And who was paying the bills, Sam?
Well, the way that the church used to work is that you volunteered your time or your property or your money, and the church appreciated you, and that went towards your value in the afterlife. And if you didn't want to be appreciated, stiff shit. Like, you did what you were told and you didn't get paid for it. There's a reason that the Vatican is so rich, and it's because they've never had to pay for shit.
They just came and took what they wanted, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. But sometimes, artists particularly got their own back. And possibly the most famous artist to do it was Michelangelo. And it cracks me up.
So Michelangelo is the dude who's famous for painting the roof inside a well-known chapel for the Catholic Church.
A Sistine-ish chapel. He's also famous for the Statue of David and things like that. And he'd do things like he painted a baby angel flipping off the Pope.
Now, when you say flipping off, you don't actually mean how we would think of that. It's not like the middle finger up, right?
No, so the symbol is actually your index finger, your first finger kind of crooked out, and you're making a soft fist, and you angle your hand down a little bit. And it's called the fig. Is the old world gesture, and there's a little baby angel with its arm around another baby angel reading a Bible over someone's shoulder and giving the fig, and it means fuck you. The wordage has not changed. Now the Sistine Chapel was painted under Pope Julius II, who by all historical accounts was not a good, pious, loving, respectful pope. He was an asshole.
Pretty awful guy by the sounds of it.
Yeah, look, not every pope has been fabulous, unfortunately. And so nobody ever noticed at the time that that this baby angel was giving a giant fuck you to the Pope because the ceiling was so high and the angel was so far away.
And everybody, because of all the low lighting anyway, everybody's eyeballs were not the best condition when they were looking at those sorts of things. Maybe only young people with young, fresh eyes could see it.
Yeah, maybe. But then 30 years later, they made him come back and paint some more. And
which I'm sure he absolutely loved after loathing the first task he was given.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that they asked politely and, made it a choice. So he painted the gates of hell behind the Pope's chair, which, if you're familiar at all with any kind of imagery, you can see why that's a giant fuck you.
Oh my gosh. So even do you think that he was trying to subvert the church based on sexual freedoms and that sort of thing, or?
It's hard to say sexual freedoms because we don't know loads and loads about his personal life. We know a bit. But it is pretty clear that he considered himself a man of science. And he struggled a lot with the fact that for instance, learning anatomy by studying dead bodies or learning about the inside of bodies was absolutely forbidden, because that was God's domain. So the famous painting of Adam almost touching the finger of God, if you actually look at what God's in, it's anatomically a brain. And that's also implying that God's a figment of the imagination. So he was apparently a raging atheist.
Wow, and he did all of these super famous religious paintings.
Yeah, again, didn't have much choice in the matter.
Oh dear. You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
Empty Closet Radio, because no one wants to be stuck in the closet. You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. And we've been talking a bit about history and the history of different things like condoms and bread dildos and
Atheist art as commissioned by the Catholic Church.
You know what sometimes happens when we talk about history, Sam, is that we tend to whitewash it. Or like we put our own cultural values onto the stories that we find.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for the implicit bias of historians, and archaeologists and scientists and everybody studying things.
Well, and everything, because, you know, if you have no framework to understand something, and then you can't understand it, or you can't even try to understand it.
But, you know, the values of open-mindedness were perhaps not always followed when looking through history. And, in particular, when talking about the stuff we're talking about today, I like to call it the hetero lens of history.
Is that kind of like, you know, when you get a camera lens and you like get Vaseline and just smear it on so you can't see anything, and you're like, oh, that looks like a person doing this, when they're doing something completely different?
Yeah, so it's the tendency to see, like people who say, you know, we didn't used to have all these sexualities. Well, clearly we did. There's either no written record of them, or you're looking at photos of people rolling in the grass and cuddling as two guys being friends in the 40s. You know, maybe you could be wrong about what's going on.
Or maybe we didn't document all of these things because in the past we used to have mental asylums and we'd send people there for all kinds of stupid stuff.
Well, not even just that, just the fact that, you know, we don't know about a lot of common people because history was written by A, the victors, and B, the rich people. So we know a bit more about them. But, one figure in particular that I find really interesting to think about the hetero lens of history is when you think about royalty, you know, and you think about, different royal families, particularly European royal families, because that's what we as a culture that has come from Europe tend to know the best about.
Well, and the royal family structure really only works if it's full of heteros.
Well, at least, or if it's full of people having sex with people who have genitals that don't match theirs.
Do you reckon that has happened before, where like people are like, oh, I don't really want to do this, but the family expects it of me?
Oh yeah, we have plenty of historical evidence that there are, you know, the second king of England, I think it was, William the Conqueror's son, or his grandson, his wife, the she-wolf of France, Isabel, who was theoretically the first queen but was never crowned, she was really angry because her husband didn't pay her any attention because he was too busy off with his squire, who everybody knew he was having sex with. The man ended up executed. Like, it was a really tragic story all round, but you can't claim that he wasn't gay. But he, like, you can shut your eyes and pretend really hard, like, if you have to. But when I talk about the hetero lens, aside from that, people are like, oh, blasphemy, whatever, is someone like Christina, Queen of Sweden. If you look in most encyclopedias, they will tell you that she ruled for 10 years, she was raised like a boy, and she abdicated because she didn't want to get married or because she converted to Catholicism, and Sweden was a Lutheran country at the time. We don't actually know if she converted to Catholicism. But the vast majority of mainstream encyclopedias or histories will fail to remind you that she had lovers that were both men and women, you know, and that she was bisexual, and part of the reason she didn't want to get married was probably because she wanted to be free to do whatever she wanted, and she was in a position of power and she could do that. She abdicated the throne. She adopted her cousin as her, like, son and heir. Her cousin was busy trying to get married to her. He'd spent 10 years trying to get her to marry him, and she's like, no, you're my son, like, and then she went off to Rome and had another string of lovers of both genders.
I love this woman. She's amazing.
Yeah, she was fantastic. By all accounts, there's less known about her parents, but the theory is that her parents were bisexual as well, but there's less documented evidence of it. But there's no doubt that there's plenty of people who were very close to their chambermaids, you know, for instance, queens and things like that, but it didn't get spoken about. So the lens is that, oh no, they're all heterosexual. Clearly, that's an accurate depiction of history.
I wonder if we were to go back and document the lives of ordinary people during these times, about what sort of things we would find, whether our behaviours have changed through time significantly.
I find it very interesting how this era will be looked at in the future, because the last probably couple of decades, to be truly accurate, but the last, say, 100 years is the first time that we've had a really, really solid grounding in the feelings and the lives of people who are poor. or whatever, because before that, people, like, and even still now, there's plenty of people who can't write, but people who were poor didn't have a way to document their own lives. Their lives were seen through the lens of the people who paid them or who owned them. Whereas now, you know, everybody has social media or they have a camera and they can document it. So this is exciting. There's actually going to be more levels of society for historians to look at, and maybe they won't view it through a hetero lens.
Maybe. There's also going to be like so many selfies that they're going to have to wade through to find the actual interesting facts.
Selfies are good too because they tell you what people were wearing.
That's true. They also tell you a lot about duckface.
Tonight is calling, your name is on it, your eyes, I think I've seen them hit before.
Empty Closet Radio, 9 p.m. Tuesdays, 101.9 Coast FM.
You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
Sam, what's the ancient version of a selfie?
All the paintings of royal people and rich people. So Renaissance art is selfies and Bible fan art. Like, we figured this out, remember?
Yeah, so like rich people have been having selfies made for like forever, except they just needed a painter to do them for them.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about the me generation now. If you spent thousands and thousands of dollars at the time, so millions today, and sat for hours and hours and hours to get a picture of yourself to put on the wall, possibly more the me generation.
So true, so true. Now, we have been talking about history today. We've been talking a lot about like ancient history. But what about more recently, Sam? What about like the 80s? What is your favourite part about the 80s?
Well, I was technically born in the 80s, right at the end, so that's probably up there.
Technically, I was born at the end of the 80s as well. Not quite at the end of the 80s, but in the 80s. And I love like all the crazy things that they used to wear.
My hair would so fit in.
Yeah, I was about to say crazy hair, crazy perms, you know, hilarious stuff. Lucky for us, this week, there is a little flashback to the 80s on Friday night. If you're interested, Sam, you could go to this party and just like, you could just let your hair like all hang out. It would be like it had been permed.
If you don't know about the fashion of the 80s because you've never been to an 80s party, if you've ever seen the show Kath and Kim, you dress like that, and that's the 80s fashion. It's true, Andrew. It's a great guide.
Oh my God, it's a fantastic guide because time just stood still for Kath and Kim. Oh, how funny. But anyway, so the 80s, they've got this party coming up. It's an out party, so, you know, there's like, I think it's like $5 to get in, but all the money goes towards charities and towards running these events in the future. And it is a gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, safe party. It's for everyone. So come along, bring your friends along. It's going to be at the Green Ant Cantina on Friday night from 7 p.m. So that's like an early night, really. Get your costume sorted early. You can go along, enjoy yourself with your friends. It's going to be a good night. And it will be very camp, I'm sure. You're on 101.9 Coast FM in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
What you have doesn't count. You've given your soul away.
Empty Closet Radio. Follow us on Twitter. You're on 101.9 Coast of February, the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam. I'm making Andrew snigger. But that is all we have time for this week, Andrew. You can't snigger on the radio anymore. We've run out of time.
You nearly made me spill my tea, Sam.
A tragedy of galactic proportions. Now, if you do want to catch up on any past episodes, you can just search for us on your favourite podcasting app. Look for Empty Closet Radio. Hit the subscribe button. They'll probably be less silly than this episode sometimes.
They're mainly pretty silly, Sam. There are some serious ones, though.
Yeah, no, we do try to give quality as well as ridiculousness. Now, if you do want to check out our social media pages, we are on the Big Blue Book of Faces, Empty Closet Radio. Hit the like button, or you can look for us on the Blue Tweety Bird at emptycloset_AU, all lowercase. Reminder, condoms. Use them if you're having sex and you have things to cover.
And don't do what the ancient Greeks did and use olive oil. That's a terrible idea with condoms.
You're on 101.9 Coast FM. You're in the Empty Closet with Andrew and Sam.
Thinking of a time that has already passed. wishing that it wouldn't, but it couldn't last.
Thanks for listening to The Empty Closet, brought to you by 1019 Coast FM Cairns.